Living in America used to be a dream for so many people far away and unseen. With their big cars, movie stars, living in America. Now all hail to the red, white, and blue. Living in America was a dream. In this land they tell you to reach for anything you want. And everything is possible, just believe that you can. 'Cause we're God's chosen children, living in America with that long house and white picket fences, living in America.
Hey everybody, this is Richard Sachs, here host on Lost Arts Radio. This is our worldwide show for broadcast on June 25th, Sunday. And it's kind of an exciting show for me because we have our friend Alex Newman back, and I always really enjoy that. He's a very sharp observer and commentator on world situations, and the usual bio that we've read parts of before is an award-winning international journalist. He's a foreign correspondent for the New American magazine, which you may remember, and he's written for publications all over the world, and also has a consulting company, Information Consulting, which is Liberty Sentinel Media Incorporated. And he's been on the show periodically. And the reason that I wanted specifically to invite him to be with us this time is that one of the things that Donald Trump did recently, in the midst of the constant attacks from media and other allied sources to try to destroy him and criticize anything really good that he does, is that he said, no, we're not going to be part of the so-called Paris climate agreement that really never became an official treaty because Obama just accepted it personally and didn't bother going to Congress to get it ratified. So it's just sitting there as an unofficial agreement. And so it was easy for Trump to say, no, we're not going to do this. And he gave a detailed speech about why and all the terrible things about it. But because of mainstream media, there are millions of people who still actually believe that it was going to help the Earth's environment somehow, and that Trump obviously hates the Earth, and that's why he didn't want to be part of it. So he's just a monster, as the media explains, and we'll get into that. But ahead of that, I just want to thank you for being with us, Alex. I know you're really busy, and thank you for the time, and I'm looking forward to our discussion here.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me, Richard. I appreciate it, and I love the opportunity to come on your show. You guys do some awesome work, so thank you.
It's just fun. We get to enjoy it, I think, being right in the middle of it, and I get to learn so much from incredible guests like yourself and others that I feel like I'm really privileged for it. But where I'd kind of like to start, you can say a little bit about your background just for new listeners and people who haven't heard you when you've been on before. What's important to you, what led you to what you're doing now, and then let's get into what this agreement really is, and we can talk about how it fits into the context of the large-scale attempt to destroy what Donald Trump is doing. But let's go into your own background briefly first.
Sure. Well, I have kind of a weird background, probably pretty unique. I've grown up in 7 different countries on 4 different continents, and so I've been, propagandized, bombarded with UN propaganda all my life. So when I started realizing that this actually was a very dangerous totalitarian institution dedicated to promoting totalitarianism, really, and global government, it was a pretty big shock for me. Ever since I realized that, I've realized that I had to do something to spread awareness about this problem, because there's so many other people who, just like me, had received nothing but globalist propaganda and indoctrination. And, these people need to wake up or we're going to lose our freedom. So I got into media, and in my role in media, as a journalist, I've had the opportunity to cover a lot of these issues very closely. And in fact, I've been to many of these UN climate summits, including the Paris summit in Paris, France, where they came up with this so-called Paris Agreement. And so I got to see the proverbial sausage being made, so to speak. And you know what they say about that: once you see it being made, you'll never eat it again.
They say don't do it if you want to keep eating, right?
Right, exactly. So I got to see this disgusting process firsthand. Just a horror show. And so, that's for me. It just makes me even more passionate about doing the right thing and exposing this. Again, totalitarianism, this evil, this gigantic hoax that is the global warming fraud, and the even bigger hoax that are the policies ostensibly designed to deal with it. So,
right. Okay, so warning to the audience that we are going to discuss how sausage is made on this show. So if you want to finish up your eating quickly right now. But it doesn't end, negative. I mean, it's very hopeful. But in order to know what has to be done to make it better, it's good to know what the real situation actually is, which is very often the opposite of what you're given by government agencies and the media. So we're going to go into that. Anyway, so you got into education and journalism, right? That's what you're basically ending up with.
That's right. Yep. I work primarily in education and journalism. My consulting has to do with both of those things, and it's just been a really great opportunity to. One of the reasons I like journalism is that it allows you to learn a little bit about a lot of things and a lot about a few things. Other people go to work and just focus on one particular thing. In my work, I get to learn about lots of different things, and so climate is one of them. And then you also learn about other things that interact with the subjects that you're dealing with. So it's just been a really great opportunity to be able to learn about some of these things and do my little small part in trying to make others aware of this stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a super important point because the educational system as it exists now, most of it publicly and some of the mainstream private schools are leaning towards total specialization. And what happens is by the time somebody's done with higher education, so-called, they end up with this huge amount of information that they've memorized, not really understood, about such a narrow subject. They really don't understand the context of what's important about it, and they've prepared themselves to be used as a tool of some kind of global corporation or a government that's involved in destroying the earth. Just the kind of thing that they're saying that the Paris Agreement prevents, and all these corporations are involved in full speed trying to destroy the earth as fast as possible in various ways, and the specialized, educated people who don't know the context of what they're doing are perfect for that. So you're doing kind of the antidote for it.
Yep, and I think we've talked about this before on your show, and it's such an important point. So many people, they get a PhD in some super narrow subject, and then they don't see the big picture, right? The forest gets lost because you're staring too closely at the tree. And, I think it's important to be able to have context and to put all of this stuff into context, or it won't make any sense.
Exactly right. I mean, at least it encourages what used to be called wisdom and is conspicuously missing from most of education now.
Yep.
Anyway, you said you were at a bunch of these UN meetings, I think, right? So why don't we look at
I've been going to these for almost a decade now. So.
Okay. So do they fit together? Are they disconnected, or are they part of a sequential program, or what's the deal with how they relate to each other?
Well, each one is, I think a big reason why these things take place is that a lot of these bureaucrats just like to be able to stay in 5-star hotels and exotic locations at beautiful resorts and, fly around the world first class. Yeah, there's a whole lot of that going on. These people live it up like kings.
What a great deal. I'll help destroy the world. It's getting destroyed anyway, and we get to stay in these great hotels, and it sounds like a lot of fun. And
they do have fun. They have parties and waste all kinds of taxpayer money. Without fail, every single one of these I've gone to. If you fly into the airport, you see they have private jets lined up around the block. Because all these celebrities.
Of course, none of those use any carbon, right? They don't use.
Right, exactly. And then they show up and they say, "You need to ride your bicycle more." They pop out the private jet.
If they want the really,
you gotta be kidding me.
If they want the really high positions, they have to do the parties and the jets and everything, but then change their demeanor when they get in front of the camera and say, we're all working as hard as we can to never use any more energy and save the world by committing suicide, and
right.
In fact,
or
there was a bumper sticker. There was a bumper sticker that said, "Save the world, kill yourself." I don't know if you remember that one.
No. But, it's really a common sentiment at a lot of these UN summits. I went to the UN Summit on Sustainable Development. It was down in Rio de Janeiro in 2012. And, of course, it was chaired by a Chinese communist. Obviously, who else would chair the summit other than a Chinese communist? Yeah. And they had these posters there. And the poster, it was, a sick anthropomorphic Earth. It had eyes and a nose, and it looked very sad, and it had the thermometer sticking out of its mouth. Yes, and the doctor comes and he says, "Oh, I know your problem. You have humans, right? So humans are the disease that we need to eradicate,
like lice or something, right? Except
exactly, yeah. And if we could just get rid of that disease, this cancer on the planet, then the Earth would be happy, right? Mother Earth would be happy, and we could go back to this pristine, wonderful, wilderness, they like to call it. So this really is the mindset of a lot of these people. We make fun of it, but it really, a lot of people at these summits really think that way. I call them the useful idiots. That was Lenin's term. Yeah. And a lot of these useful idiots really believe this, that humans are bad, and if we could just get rid of all these humans, everything would be nice. So
Right. And I have, for full disclosure, I have to admit in the middle of this program that I'm a really serious environmental person. I'm completely in favor of making everything truly sustainable in the way that we're not poisoning our life support system. I think that would be good. But I don't see any connection at all between that and what the UN agenda is.
No, it's in fact the exact opposite. I agree with you 100%. I care about the environment, and I think all sensible people should. But what this global warming hoax does is it actually distracts from real issues and harms the planet. The entire essence of this global warming hoax is that CO2, a trace gas in the atmosphere, human emissions of CO2 make up a fraction of 1% of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. But the whole premise of the hoax is that CO2 is bad, that it's pollution, and that it needs to be taxed and regulated by the United Nations. But CO2 is actually the gas of life. And, if you look back into history, we have mountains of evidence showing that in the Earth's past, CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere were, in the thousands of parts per million. Today it's 400 parts per million. And if you look at the plants, they're actually designed to exist in an atmosphere with 3, 4, 5, 6 times as much CO2 as the atmosphere currently has. So the fact that CO2 levels are going up is actually a wonderful thing. It increases crop yields, it greens the forests, it increases the productivity of the oceans, and they're telling us that this is bad.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's like if the plants had voted to regulate oxygen,
exactly.
They didn't want to get
oxygen is pollution. We need to pay a tax for that. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. When in reality, the oxygen levels are lower than they've been in the past, and that's a problem too.
Yep.
The other thing is that I totally agree with the UN people that there is man-made disruption of the climate, but the main source of that I can see is there's a vast fleet of jets flying around dumping toxic metals and all kinds of biological weapons and stuff into the atmosphere almost all over the Earth now. And we're seeing patterns in the weather flow, instead of, for example, on the United States, it used to always go pretty much straight west to east with the so-called trade winds. And now they've invented something they call a polar vortex that I never saw before a few years ago. And normally nature doesn't change like that, and it's taking super frozen air from the North Pole and bringing it down into the southern U.S. almost straight north to south. And I think those things are being intentionally engineered and disrupted by the fleets of jets interacting with the HAARP system. So I guess I agree with the UN that there is man-made climate disruption. It's just not exactly what they're talking about.
Yeah, well, I've heard about a lot of these things, and I've listened to presentations that are very compelling. It's pretty far outside my field of expertise, but I'm definitely inclined to believe that they're up to no good. And, we've known for decades that governments have had the ability to manipulate weather, and then all this is public record. The U.S. government and the Soviet government and many governments have
owning
worked on
weather by
these kinds of projects.
2025 or something, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And I heard a very good presentation about this by a guy who works on this issue at a conference that I went to, and I spoke at actually about climate last year. And I think it's something that needs to be investigated. And you hear a lot of these people saying, "Oh, we just need to do geoengineering to fix the global warming problem. We'll just spray stuff up in the sky."
Everybody to panic about global warming and believe that it's the immediate threat, and that the cure, of course, is geoengineering, which fortunately they've already been doing since 1940 something, whenever they started, and it's gotten really widespread since 1995 or so, somewhere in the 90s. Now, I talk to people in countries in different parts of the world, and they're all heavily being sprayed, and they weren't before. So it's a major program. They're just starting to get people used to the idea, but they actually have career tracks now in major universities all over the world where you can be a professional geoengineer. And they're still saying...
I've seen the UN has even had conferences about this type of stuff. There's been legislation proposed dealing with these issues. So, I think it's something that absolutely must be explored. And knowing what I know about the establishment, about the maniacs who like to think that they're in charge, I think they're capable of mass murder on an industrial scale. What makes us think that they wouldn't be capable of poisoning the environment for whatever purposes they might have? So
it's just like the Industrial Revolution for murder, right? Because they've already shown what they'll do on a somewhat less technological scale, like in you may know more about this than I do, but in places like Africa and some parts of South America, they have, I'm not sure the exact mechanism, but they've been able to kill certain populations of villages and then set aside the land that they steal for some kind of a carbon sink or something like that. Do you know how that works?
Oh, well, they've been doing this quite a lot, actually, and I've written about it. It's been happening in Central America and Africa, where they do these carbon credit programs. Yeah. And they literally wipe entire villages out, and they say, well, we need this area to plant some trees. And then they plant the trees, supposedly, and then they sell the carbon credits to people like Al Gore, who, of course, makes his share of the cut, and it gives him an excuse to fly on his private jet, and he can say, well, I offset my carbon emissions by stealing land from Africans and planting a tree.
Well, right, so, and they're also getting rid of a lot of potential disease by killing all those people, right?
Well, that's probably how some of them justify it to themselves. It's really sick, and there's been so much of this going on. The World Bank has been exposed with its involvement in this, the United Nations, the European Union, a number of different front groups that they have. And actually, I've written a number of stories about it in the New American if people are interested in seeing these things. It happened in Honduras and other parts of Central America as well, where, under the guise of quote-unquote carbon credits, they're just perpetrating atrocities against innocent, helpless people who have no way of getting the information out.
I think it's beyond the imagination of most normal people. It just sounds like it's made up. What's the website where people can read the New American, and how do they find those articles?
I actually, myself, I use a search engine if I'm looking for a particular article. So if I were to search for one of these, I would maybe go to a search engine, type in, www.thenewamerican.com, and then a couple of keywords. Maybe type in EU, World Bank, brutalize Africans, carbon credits, and it should pop right up. It should be the top result, at least until Google finishes its project on censorship. So,
I mean, it's too bad to have to learn about that stuff, but that's what's really going on. So,
it is.
If you go back to the, what was that, about 2 years ago now that the Paris Climate Agreement meeting was happening? Is it 2 years?
Yeah, actually, it was held in December of 2015, so about a year and a half ago.
Year and a half, okay. So why don't you just introduce the whole idea of that for people that don't know about it, and how wonderful of a thing it was presented as, and where that might be a little bit inaccurate.
Yeah, right. Well, the story, of course, goes back a long way. If you start at the beginning, you started with the global cooling scare of the 1970s and the 1980s.
Fortunately, we just barely got out of that one, right? Thanks to the
exactly.
UN and everything. Okay.
Well, you had people like John Holdren, Obama's science czar, who in 1977 he wrote a book called Eco-Science. Him and that population control nut Paul Ehrlich. And he said, To deal with the population crisis, we could have forced abortions, which could be sustained under our existing Constitution. We could add sterilizing agents to the water supply to make sure people don't have any more children. This is the kind of mindset these people have. And, of course, they also believed in the man-made global cooling hoax. They said that human emissions of CO2 were going to lead to this incredible cooling, and that was going to produce another ice age, which was going to lead to the starvation of 1 billion people.
Yeah,
and sometime around
1975 or so, we were reading that.
Oh yeah, that was mainstream news back then. Newsweek ran an interesting article where the quote unquote climate experts they all agreed that we needed to melt the Arctic ice cap with black suits because it was going to be too big and it was going to take over the world. So
exactly.
if you go back far enough, that's where the story starts. And then you can go to the Club of Rome in 1981. They put out a report. The first global revolution, and they said, well, the USSR is ostensibly coming down. What's going to unite us anymore if not the threat of nuclear annihilation? Well, we need a new problem. So why don't we do global warming? And that's pretty clever, because then the enemy is humanity itself. And they actually write this in the report that humanity will be the enemy.
Yeah.
And, it's...
Now, which report, if people wanted to read that, if somebody comes up to me and says, well, I don't believe that, where is it written down? Which report are we referring to, and how do people access it?
This is a report by the Club of Rome. For those who don't know, the Club of Rome is a group of senior globalists and communists, people like Mikhail Gorbachev, people like Al Gore, people like David Rockefeller. So these are the Club of Rome people, and a lot of other very, very powerful, influential people from the East, quote unquote, the former Soviet Union and so on, and from the Western establishment. And they came up with this report, and they said, well, we're going to invent this thing of global warming and pollution, and that'll be perfect to justify, continued globalism and big government. And so,
does that report have a name that people could look up and read it?
I think it's called the First Global Revolution, something along those lines. Maybe our Global Revolution, something along those lines. So that's a good one to look at if people want to understand the genesis of all this. In 1997, they finally got the Kyoto Protocol. Eventually after they realized that it wasn't actually cooling down as much as they thought, and that the global cooling hoax was falling apart. And funny how the solutions for global cooling are the same as the solutions for global warming, right? Give us all your money, give up all your freedom, and then submit to us, and then we'll cure the problem.
Yeah. So regardless, the world is going to be saved, right?
Right, exactly. As long as you give up all your money and all your freedom, no problem, right? We'll keep you safe from man, bear, pig. Global cooling and global warming.
And it also saves you from being selfish and becoming spiritually worthless, too. So it has a lot of... Okay.
Yep. So anyways, they had the summit in Kyoto. They ratified the Kyoto Protocol. The U.S. government never formally ratified it, and then George Bush actually ended up taking us out of it. But so there was a whole bunch of these climate summits. Each one they tried to get some kind of global binding agreement that would basically allow the UN to tax us for our carbon emissions, and they kept failing. They thought they were going to finally succeed in Copenhagen. You had, Obama flew in, and so I was at the summit in Copenhagen. It was interesting. Al Gore informed us that within 5 years, the North Polar ice cap is going to be completely melted. And, of course, 5 years came and went, and the North Polar ice cap was 50% bigger than it was when Al Gore made his dumb prediction.
Well, so that means giving up your freedom works, then. That's really good.
Right, exactly. But maybe if we had not surrendered so much of our freedom and our money, then maybe the North Polar ice cap would have been melted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, that's the kind of idiocy that they expect us to believe. Fortunately, that proposed agreement out of Copenhagen ended up falling through. Okay. And they tried again in the intervening years, and then Paris was finally the big one. They finally thought they had the magic formula. They were going to try to bypass the U.S. Senate, right? So Obama invented this term, an executive agreement. And he said executive agreements don't actually need advice and consent from the U.S. Senate. So now we can have a global treaty on global warming, but we don't have that pesky Congress and those pesky American people to worry about.
That sounds really impressive. Executive agreement, that sounds incredible.
Right, and I encourage people to open up your pocket constitution and show me which part authorizes an executive agreement, and we'll take it from there.
Well, we have the abridged version. The rulers have the real version of the full constitution.
Right, exactly. Exactly. That one includes all the crazy Supreme Court rulings where they find stuff in the penumbras of the Constitution, right? So that's the kind of stuff we're dealing with. So anyways, they finally came together in Paris, and it was a spectacle to behold. I mean, one of the first things that happened when I got there, I got my press release from the G77 plus China, which is a group of actually 134 dictatorships, crooked third world regimes, Islamist tyrannies, communist dictatorships, socialist dictatorships, just your various tin-horn dictators and corruptocrats. And they said, in so many words, we demand $100 billion per year in climate reparations because, the evil industrial countries, they've already emitted all this CO2, and so now we want reparations. And if we don't get $100 billion a year, we're walking out of here.
I think that's fair. They should actually charge more especially to the white males, because they've done most of the damage.
Right. That's kind of the prevailing sentiment here. And the communist dictators. Oh yeah, that's why we're poor, because of evil capitalism and evil carbon emissions from the evil Western countries. So that was their idea, anyways, and they wanted $100 billion a year as a starting point, right? They said that would be good enough to start, and we would scale it up from there.
Well, there's inflation. You don't want them to get into a stressed situation, having to get around 100. Okay.
Right. And so, anyways, they established this green climate fund. Obama agreed. Oh yeah, absolutely. We'll send you guys $100 billion. Those suckers, taxpayers, they got so much money anyway. We'll just take it away and send it to you guys, and that'll solve global warming. So they agreed that they were going to create this green climate fund, and the European governments and the Canadian government, Australian government, Obama, and so on, they all agreed that they would steal more money from their taxpayers and send it to the UN and the third world dictators. And so that set the stage. You had 134 governments saying, ooh, look at this. We just hold our hand out, money comes, and all we have to do in exchange is keep our people totally poor without energy. That's a good deal. We can build ourselves a better palace, and we don't have to do much.
And this is, you're talking about Paris still, right?
Yes, I'm talking about in Paris, yep.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
So they came up with this idea, and that really facilitated the discussion, right? If you're told that there's going to be a $100 billion a year pot of money, and all you have to do is sign on the dotted line and continue successfully oppressing your people and making sure that they don't have access to affordable, reliable energy, it really smooths things over. And so that's what happened. Then they ironed out the final details. Obama basically said, we're going to slash CO2 emissions using executive orders and EPA regulations by, I forget what it was, 28% over the next 5 or 10 years. As basically communist China said, oh, that's great. Yeah, maybe by the year 2030, we'll consider reducing our CO2 emissions, maybe. We'll figure it out when we get there. And so that was basically the deal, right? Western economies would commit suicide, would impose these crazy totalitarian limits on how much of the gas of life we're allowed to emit. And people should understand, too, you emit about 2 pounds of CO2 in a regular day just by breathing, right? So there's nothing you can do at all, including breathing, that doesn't involve emissions of CO2.
So this scientifically proves that humans are evil, then.
Right. I mean, all we do is pollute all day. We just sit on the couch and we're polluting. It's crazy. Okay. So that's the theory anyways. And so they decided that Western economies would all shoot themselves in the foot and hand over all their money. And in exchange, we would empower the UN to save us and give lots of money to third world dictators. And so they came up with this, fancy scheme that the way they got around all the opposition that they had was they said it will do nationally determined contributions. Each government will come and say, this is what we're going to do. And so Obama made his pledges. We're going to, give you a bunch of money. We're going to reduce CO2 emissions. And all the other governments came and they said what they were going to do. Many of them said, we're not going to do anything except take your money.
Yeah.
And so they came to this agreement. And, it's pretty easy to come to an agreement when you have $100 billion a year to hand out.
Right.
And so
that's because that came out of the surplus that the U.S. has just been sitting on, right? That is just in all the extra gold and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just the privilege, it just comes out of our ears.
Okay. And I know Obama in the middle of that, or maybe it was a little bit after. When did he go and give the famous talk in Africa that if they were able to have cars and air conditioners, the world would boil over? So forget about that.
I remember that, but I don't remember if that was before or after Paris. I think I remember exactly what you're talking about.
The reason I bring it up is that it's clarifies that even though $100 billion of debt is going to be taken from the U.S. and given to the other rulers, it doesn't mean that they should get uppity and think they could have cars or anything like that.
Right. You can't have people having ACs and cars and the basic essentials and food and water. Gosh, can't have that. We got to get rid of these people, not give them everyday essentials.
And this is without thinking of all the damage to the earth that the animals are doing, because think of how much they're breathing as well.
That's right. They breathe too. Maybe Al Gore can figure out a way to extract some carbon taxes from them.
Yeah. Okay. So all this agreement was made. Obama agreed to it unilaterally, basically, as an executive agreement, right? That's what you're saying.
Yep. And an executive agreement, of course, is a non-thing, right? I mean, this is not authorized in the Constitution. The Senate is supposed to advise and consent on any treaty, and that means 2/3 of the senators present have to agree to ratify the treaty. And even then, there's an additional stipulation that all the treaties, of course, have to be made in pursuance thereof, right? So I
was going to ask you about that. Yeah, so they can't just go making treaties that override the Constitution.
Exactly. And, the founders were very, very clear about this. Thomas Jefferson, one of the fathers of the Constitution, said, of course, the treaty-making power is not boundless. It has to be subservient to the Constitution. And even the Supreme Court, which is, no fount of constitutional wisdom, they ruled in 1957 in Reed versus Covert that, if the government doesn't have that power delegated to it in the Constitution, it cannot usurp that power merely by signing up to a treaty, an international agreement or a treaty. And so, if they want an additional power, they have to properly amend the Constitution. So,
right.
And and I should clarify too, these powers that we're talking about in this Paris Agreement are totally unconstitutional. There's absolutely no power to regulate the gas of life or any other gas, for that matter. Authorized in the federal Constitution. There's no power to redistribute our money to third world dictators and the United Nations. There's no power to seize control of the energy production of the United States. There's no power to dictate to automakers how much CO2 emissions can come out of the tailpipe of a car. So basically, all these powers that the government purported to assume under this Paris Agreement were illegal to begin with. So even if the Senate had ratified this agreement, and there was no way that was going to happen, and Obama knew that, even then, it still would have been unconstitutional. So
right. Yeah, it reminds me of, do you remember the story about when Davy Crockett was in the Congress, and he was walking around to his constituents asking them if they would vote for him when he was running again, and this farmer that he visited said, "No, I'm really sorry I voted for you the first time." And Davy Crockett was really, honorable type person according to the stories, and he said, "Well, what did I do?" And he said, "You voted to give this money to this widow whose house burned down," or something like that. Do you remember that story?
I know exactly what story you're talking about, and that's funny because I just heard the story for the first time very recently. But I don't remember exactly what the unconstitutional vote was, but I know exactly what you're talking about. And then Davy Crockett looked and said, "You're right, that is unconstitutional, and please forgive me, and I won't do it again." So yeah,
exactly. Even though it was a wonderful cause, unlike the UN, it was something completely good. But that's not what government is for.
Exactly, right. And, there's plenty of good causes, and we don't need to grant the federal government unconstitutional powers to deal with those good causes. And the big government mongers, they make this fallacy. They say, "Oh, you don't believe in, federal food stamp program, therefore you want children to starve." And no, you have this all wrong.
Like you want Davy Crockett to let that lady die. And how would you attempt to explain to those people, if they're really sincerely thinking that, why you don't just have the government save everybody from everything? It seems like that would be so wonderful,
Yeah, I go over this with my economics students. I know we've talked about that on your program before. There's two really serious problems with the idea. The first, two really serious ways that we know this is a problem. The first is the theoretical problems, right? When the government starts taking care of everyone and trying to run everything, we run into a number of theoretical problems that they can't overcome. You have, for example, the incentive problem, where, when you have a socialist economy, a centrally planned economy, the incentives get flipped on their head. In a free market economy, people naturally have an incentive to work as hard as possible, right, because they're going to reap the rewards from that. They have an incentive to be as frugal as possible because they want the savings, which they can then invest or save, for their retirement or the future or whatever. Right. Whereas in a socialist economy, the incentives are flipped upside down. Your incentive is to work as little as possible and to consume as much as possible. So you have that. You have, of course, the calculation problem, which, once the government starts trying to run everything, you lose the natural market signals that indicate whether something is a good idea or a bad idea. To give you an example, if we didn't have prices on things, which in a centrally planned economy, you wouldn't have prices on resources and goods, how would somebody, a central planner, know whether they were adding value or destroying value, right? I mean, in a free market economy, if you take resources and labor worth $100 and turn it into a table that sells for $200, then the market is telling you, the consumers are telling you, hey, that's a really good use of resources. You're adding $100 worth of value by combining these things together. Please continue to do that. Whereas, if you took that $100 worth of resources and turned it into tables and people would spend $50 on the table, well, then you've just destroyed $50 worth of wealth. So that's a pretty powerful signal to stop doing that. But, under a centrally planned system, you don't have those signals. So you might just go on your merry way, destroying value, destroying wealth, and so you end up with the next problem that we come to, which is, the historical evidence. We have massive amounts of historical data showing that the more the government gets involved in trying to run the economy, trying to take care of people, trying to provide, food and healthcare and these things to people, the worse the situation becomes. And this is true all over the world, everywhere, in all points in history. And even today, if we look around the world, this becomes very, very obvious, right? Where are the most prosperous societies in the world? Well, places like Switzerland and Hong Kong and Singapore and Canada and Australia and New Zealand. And what do those societies have in common? Well, they're at the top of the index of economic freedom, right? They have more economic freedom than other societies. Which are the poorest, most miserable societies? And those are the societies that have the least amount of economic freedom, where the government promises that, we're going to take care of you, we're going to feed you, we're going to give you health care, we're going to make you all equal. And so then you think of Cuba, North Korea, Zimbabwe, places like this.
And a lot of those countries have fantastic natural resources. They should
do,
be
right.
in good shape.
That's exactly right. And you look at countries like Hong Kong and countries like Switzerland, they don't have any natural resources to speak of. Right. And they're fantastically wealthy. I mean, Luxembourg, right, doesn't have any natural resources really, and it's incredibly rich. And then you look at countries that do have lots of resources, but that have centrally planned economies or big governments, and what you find is that they remain mired in poverty to this day.
Yeah, I think Mexico is an example of that too. I mean, it may even be richer than the U.S. It's incredible, and yet the people.
Look at Venezuela.
Yeah,
Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, and the people are literally eating their pets and breaking into zoos and slaughtering zoo animals because they're starving to death.
Yeah. In fact, I think they're at the stage after that now.
Yep, I read that last year the average Venezuelan lost something like 20 pounds due to malnutrition. So they're in really dire straits. And this is the end point of socialism, of statism, always and everywhere, right? There isn't a way to make this work properly because of some of the reasons that we just talked about.
But you have to be able to actually have some clarity of thought to grasp that.
Yeah,
right?
If these kids would learn basic history, if they would learn basic logic in their government schools, then this stuff would all be very, very obvious. It would be readily apparent to everyone. But unfortunately, they're not being taught history. They're not being taught economics. They're not being taught logic and reason. They're not being taught even to think. Right? They're just being having their heads filled with
those things are pretty much non-existent in American education, right? Except some private places.
That's right, and it's a really dangerous situation. It's easy to joke and to make fun of these people, but these people vote, and these people make up, unfortunately, a very sizable segment of our population, and a segment that's growing very quickly.
Yeah,
each generation is getting dumber and dumber.
I think a lot of them are incredibly sincere and just want things to be better. And in the last election, a whole bunch of them voted for Bernie Sanders, who was going to raise the minimum wage to make everybody okay overnight.
That's right. And it's because they're completely economically illiterate and probably functionally illiterate in terms of actually reading regular old words, too. Yeah. And so, people who genuinely want to do the right thing, they genuinely want to make things better, they say, oh, yeah, well, he'll raise our minimum wage. That'll make everyone richer. And, I mean, if you would just ask yourself a very simple question, well, if that's the case, why don't we raise the minimum wage to $1 trillion per hour, and then we'll all be trillionaires? And you realize, because that's retarded.
Right. That should be the immediate question. Why was Bernie so stingy and setting it at $15? I mean,
does he just hate poor people? He wants us to have to live on that? Right. Why not $1 million an hour?
Why should only a few people have private jets?
And the people don't actually think about these things. That's the problem, Richard. We have a society that has, by and large, lost its ability to do even just these basic reasoning, just asking yourselves basic questions about things, on minimum wage and on, just really simple stuff. And so it's a dangerous situation to be in, actually, as a society.
Did you talk about minimum wage when you're teaching your economics class?
We do. We talk about it in supply and demand. We have a decent-sized chunk of our class that's dedicated to supply and demand. Early on, we explore supply and demand, and then we, of course, naturally look at, well, what happens if somebody interferes in this, right? What happens if the government comes in and sets a price ceiling or a price floor? Well, it disrupts the natural functioning of the market. So what happens if, for example, the government sets a price floor on wages? We call this a minimum wage. And, well, what happens? Then the supply of labor that's being offered increases, the demand for labor decreases, and so you end up with a large surplus of labor, and we call this unemployment.
So a lot of people get fired, basically.
Exactly, and a lot of people don't have jobs. And then they said, look at all these people without jobs. We need government welfare to take care of these people.
Yeah.
So, it's a never-ending vicious cycle.
Do you know when the minimum wage started in the U.S.? Because I don't remember that.
I don't either. I don't know when the first federal minimum wage was passed, but we've had a lot of government interference in the economy, really going back to the Great Depression times. When the government really started interfering in the economy.
Yeah, that's why I'm wondering if Roosevelt was the one who started the minimum wage, but I don't know whether that's true.
It may well have been. He was very totalitarian in terms of trying to meddle in the economy. I mean, this is the guy who used an executive order to start confiscating people's gold. So.
Yeah, exactly. And one reason that some of these things aren't easily understood is you have so many variables operating at once. One of the main ones being the operation of the so-called central bank. Because if they're taking the wealth of the country through nefarious means of so-called inflation by, issuing money that's not backed by anything, then that skews things so much that it's really difficult to analyze the effect of anything else.
That's exactly right. Yep. And, it goes right back to this vicious cycle. So we end up with all these economic problems, all these economic distortions. The manipulation of interest rates produces all kinds of malinvestment. And when reality sets in, we have the bust part of the cycle. And that leads to a lot of pain and a lot of unemployment and a lot of businesses being shut down and a lot of houses getting foreclosed on. And then people say, well, the government should do something, right? The central bank should do something. And so then they go out and do something, and then that causes even more problems. And it's a never-ending cycle.
So if instead of raising the minimum wage and getting a lot of people fired, just theoretically in your class, if you're looking at this as a imaginary situation, what if they had said, all right, Alex, what are the things we do instead of change the minimum wage? What about making one of those shut down the central bank and bring back gold-backed money or something like that?
That would be a very useful enterprise. It would certainly help deal with a lot of the problems that we have right now in the economy, including the massive malinvestment, the manipulation of interest rates that leads to all kinds of distortions. We actually never really dealt with the ones from the last crisis, right? In 2007, 2008, everything started melting down. But instead of letting all these malinvestments be liquidated and build up from a firm foundation, what they did is they just made the problem even worse. Right? They printed money like it was going out of style. They passed out, I think, $27 trillion is what the SIGTARP said, the Special Inspector General for the Troubled Asset Relief Program. said $27 trillion. And they gave it to all their cronies and all the big banks. And
none of it went to the regular people.
No, of course not. You can't have that going to regular people. The bankers know how to fix the economy, not the regular people.
And also there's this little detail that none of that $27 trillion existed.
Right. They printed it out of thin air. That's exactly right. They created
it's an obligation,
using a computer. Yep. It came into the economy as debt. When the Federal Reserve injects money into the economy, they either do it by purchasing treasury bonds, which of course are basically a glorified IOU issued by the U.S. government that the U.S. government has to pay back by taxing its citizens.
So they're giving the government a loan when they supposedly put money into the economy.
Exactly. Yep. So the federal government will print up a bond worth $1 billion. The Federal Reserve will create $1 billion and then buy up that bond, which of course has interest payments attached to it. And then the federal government eventually needs to pay back that $1 billion plus the interest. So
this guarantees that the debt will increase as a long-term result of that kind of transaction, right?
Exactly, right. Because there's no other source of dollars. So, to pay back that money and plus the interest, we're going to have to borrow even more. And it's mathematically impossible to ever pay back all this debt unless the monetary system is changed.
Right. And so what happens when you have a lender lending more and more and more and more money that can't be repaid is eventually the lender owns the person that borrowed the money.
That's exactly right. And so that's why if every dollar in America was paid back to the banks and then ultimately to the Federal Reserve, we wouldn't be anywhere close to satisfying the debt. And so then the banks and the central bank ultimately would be justified in coming in and saying, well, we're going to take all your houses, all your businesses, all your commercial properties, basically everything, all your national parks, everything, and then you still owe us.
So one of the things that's so hard to understand is the scope of the scam that's operating right now is so vast, and it's like emotionally disturbing for people to even try to grasp it.
That's right, and it's one of many scams operating simultaneously. We have the climate scam is their most recent one, but we have the monetary system scam. We have just scam after scam after scam that is quite literally, it's kind of serving as like a parasite. The American people are the host, and the parasites are just all over the place running scams and just sucking wealth, sucking life out of the American people, quite literally.
So it's not a technical problem. We come to the same conclusion with so many other supposedly disconnected issues that in the end, whatever it is, it's not a technical issue. It's an issue of having malevolent individuals in power.
Exactly, and you're exactly right. And this transcends any one of these scams, and it spreads out across so much of what we call the modern system. Whether we're talking about government or money or media or climate or any of these things, it's basically just a scam piled on top of a scam piled on top of a scam.
Yeah, it's like we were talking to a guest about agriculture. It's the same issue because it's been known forever how to grow food really effectively without any chemical fertilizer or pesticides. But the opposite is happening. And, talking about legitimate environmental concerns, poisoning the world with fertilizer runoff and poisoning the food before you eat it. This is not brilliant, and it's not because nothing else is known. It's because the people in charge are destructive intentionally.
Yep. That's exactly right. And, then they cite the problems that they've created as an excuse to do even more wicked and malevolent things.
Yes.
Talking about agriculture, sticking with that, they say, oh, well, now our pesticides don't work anymore, so now we need to add, DNA from a bacteria that produces toxic waste, and we need to put that in your corn so that when the bugs eat it, the bugs will die. But it'll be totally safe for you to eat, don't worry.
Right, especially since the pesticide will become replicating in your gut. It's going to be great.
Exactly. Yep, it'll be good for you, right? The FDA said it was fine. Come on, eat it up.
Yeah, and they're a completely honest organization.
Everybody knows that.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is this is a super interesting show, but it's not just entertainment. Ultimately, I would personally like to see things get better. And when if we want to look for solutions, we have to really get, like we were talking about, the full context of what's going on and see, not just teach people about how bad it is, but really look for what could make it better. And I'm very interested in that. So, if you look at the central banking system as a system of theft, how ideally if you were in charge, would you set it up so that it was equally positive instead of so far on the negative direction?
Well, there's a number of ideas that have been proposed. I think the simplest one would just be, go back to what we had before we had the Federal Reserve, right? From the time the Second Bank of the United States was shut down in the, the 1830s, I think 1836 or so.
Andrew Jackson, right?
Right, exactly. Under Andrew Jackson, that was his cause célèbre, right? It was his big thing. But during that time period when we didn't have a central bank, we finally got rid of the national debt. We had the most prosperous economy in the history of all of humanity. We were inventing all kinds of amazing things and turning this vast wilderness into an advanced civilization and country. It was an amazing time. So why not go back to that? And, we can't just wake up tomorrow and say, well, hereby the Federal Reserve is abolished and we're going to go back to this. But there's logical ways to do it. You maybe start by operating parallel currencies. And a lot of states have started doing this, legalizing gold and silver as legal tender.
It's also what Bernard von Nothaus was trying to do, right?
Right, and so they called him a terrorist and put him in federal prison, of course.
So
what else would you do? Really. There's solutions to all these issues, right? None of this stuff is insurmountable. A lot of this stuff is actually pretty simple. And the Federal Reserve, they like to use these big terms, quantitative easing, make you feel stupid, and just leave it to the PhD experts. You're way too dumb to understand that. But really, It's not all that complicated.
So that's what I'm trying to do. I as we go along, I'm thinking, what's the way that we can give people the most value for each of these shows, to let them come out not just with the understanding that things are so terrible, which they are, but also that they are capable of understanding solutions and kind of some examples of what those might be like.
Well, I think some of the solutions that we need to consider is just, for one, just shutting down the whole thing. And I think the climate scam is a really excellent example of that. There's nothing that we need to change or switch out or replace. It just shut the whole thing down. I mean, this scam operates on about $1 billion worth of tax money every day. So you cut off the funding and the whole scam dries up, right? We don't have any more people whose careers are dependent on the scam.
Where's the $1 billion a day going right now?
To all sorts of different, that's probably an underestimate, because this was actually this figure was actually found by the global warming alarmists. So a lot of that goes to, quote unquote, scientists to do, quote unquote, research on global warming. A lot of it goes to, adaptation and mitigation, which is really just code word for passing money on to dictators to continue oppressing their people.
Exactly.
So, we have this massive industry that's been built up around this, and the solution is just really simply just shut the whole thing down. The thing is a giant scam. The theory underpinning it all is demonstrably false. I mean, the observable evidence shows it to be false. The hypothesis is wrong. It's just really that simple. And so, we don't need to replace anything. We don't need to change anything. We just need to shut the whole thing down. And to their credit, most Americans actually understand this. Even the most recent polls, the Pew Research, they've done a number of really interesting polls on this. Back in 2014, they put one out that said 60% of Americans reject the man-made global warming theory. When they found that, I think they became quite alarmed, and so they changed the methodology, I think, on how they're doing the survey.
Well, making the name climate change instead of global warming helps a lot.
It does, because then, it gets cold, climate change. It gets warm, climate change. It snows, climate change. Hurricane, anything that happens, they can blame climate change.
Right. Right. And so the next step after that would be an awareness of the whole vast program globally of geoengineering that's going on, because that is disrupting natural flows of weather and trade winds and things like that. Plus, they're not just making the Weather Act weird, they're dropping such incredible toxins on the ground that just by chance, the only things that are going to grow if they're successful are GMOs that are resistant to those poisons.
Yep. And, I think this really goes to obeying the Constitution. See, if we had a government that obeyed the Constitution, we would shut down any and all programs involved in this kind of, endeavor. We wouldn't have any money for this, and so it wouldn't be happening. The government would not be authorized to do it. They would not be funding programs like that. So many of these problems that we're dealing with, from the global warming hoax to the Federal Reserve hoax to, any geoengineering that may be going on to, just hoax after scam after scam. If we force the federal government to obey the Constitution, these things would become non-issues. They would be non-problems. And that applies to, the unemployment problem, the violence problem, right? If the federal government would quit waging its war on drugs, for example, which is totally unconstitutional, that would solve so much of the gang problem and the violence problem.
It would
and the
ruin
gun
a lot
problem.
of the drug business. That's true.
It would. They would all go out of business. All the Mexican cartels would be out of business. Yeah. And, it would go back to how it was before we had the war on drugs, which was, people bought drugs that they needed at the pharmacy. And, there were some people who had a drug problem, just like today there's people who have a drug problem, probably a lot more than, right. And it just shows, if we had a federal government that obeyed the Constitution, so many of these problems would be non-issues, right? They just wouldn't be problems. And we would probably still have some poor people, although we would all have a lot more resources, and so the churches and the charities could take a much better care of them.
Right.
Absolutely. Right. Yep. And, the numbers bear this out as well. Americans are on average 8 times more generous than Europeans. And that's because we haven't all been so thoroughly brainwashed that we just assume, the government should take care of people who need help. The Americans actually still go out and do charity and run soup kitchens and do things that don't involve the government. So if we would shrink the government and force it to obey the Constitution, so many of these problems would cease to exist.
I think Ron Paul pointed out that all the doctors used to spend something like a quarter of all their time doing work for free for people that couldn't afford it.
Yeah. And we would see that kind of thing again.
Right. Yep. And there wasn't...
And, dentists do the same.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, almost unbelievable to people now. They just assume that if there's some shortfall, that means government should give you the money. But government should be operating at a surplus, not a deficit, right?
Yep. And, to go back to the medicine thing, so many of the problems that we consider healthcare problems and problems with the healthcare delivery system and surging costs and all this, again, it all traces back to government meddling and government involvement, and even the corruption of medicine. These state licensing boards, now they've started threatening doctors who don't go along with, we got to inject your kid with 50 vaccines by the time they turn 12.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Agenda. So, so many of these problems, and then they blame that on the free market. They say, capitalism has made all these doctors become these savages who just want to inject your kid with 50 vaccines before they're 12. Yeah. No, capitalism didn't do that. This incestuous relationship between big pharma and the federal government, along with the vaccine court that has removed the liability from the manufacturers, along with the licensing boards that dictate to doctors what they can and can't do and can't say. All of these things have contributed to the problem.
So a lot of these things come out of agencies that are created by the government, but the government is not allowed to delegate powers that it doesn't actually have, right?
Exactly.
So most of those agencies aren't allowed to exist in reality.
Exactly. And if we went through the federal government, I would say, just a rough estimate, probably 80 to 90% of what they do is unconstitutional. There's no authority for a Department of Agriculture or a Department of Labor or a Department of Health and Human Services or a Department of Housing and Urban Development, a Department of Transportation. All this stuff is just blatantly unconstitutional. Right, education, who could forget the Department of Education? And so all of this stuff is illegal. And what it does is it causes all these new problems and then these serve to justify even further abuses and even further expansion of government.
Yeah. One thing that I often wonder about looking at all of these constitutional issues is, okay, if the federal government wasn't overstepping its bounds, how much corruption would come out of the state governments? Have you ever looked at their constitutions and what's going on with them?
There's an argument to be made that we would still have some problems at the state level, and we would, but we would have this additional protection mechanism in that if a state government became corrupt, if a state government became too large or taxed too heavily or regulated too heavily, they would pay a really steep price for that, right? Because I would move my business from Mississippi to Alabama. Or, if they raised my income taxes, I would move from New York to New Jersey, right? And so governments would have much stricter accountability because, I could just move from one state to the next. And so we would have this competition among jurisdictions to have low taxes, good government, clean government, not so much corruption. And, we're always going to have corruption with us. Fallen man is, it's part of our nature at the moment to want to, enrich ourselves and things like that. So we're always going to have corruption with us, during this age. But,
it doesn't have to be this
severely
extreme.
lessened. Right. It would be lessened to the extreme if we managed to get rid of the federal behemoth operating in Washington, D.C.
Well, my concerns about the state are being illustrated now by California, for example. And I heard that they just passed, the Senate just passed a single-payer health care bill that wants to spend $400 billion a year making health care free for everybody. And
so it'll be a very quick time frame between now and when California is forced to declare bankruptcy and they come begging the federal government for a bailout.
And it's something like twice their current budget for everything.
Doesn't surprise me at all.
We're going to make it free and wonderful.
Yeah.
So
they'll find out pretty quickly what a miserable failure that will be.
It's amazing that people with the current mentality often can't get it, and I think they're being goaded on by the people at higher levels that do get it and are figuring that they'll benefit from complete destruction.
Oh, absolutely. There's no question about it. At the top of the pyramid, so to speak, there are very, very malevolent and wicked people who fully understand the evil that they're perpetrating, who do not believe for 1 second the lies that they're pushing on people, that, if we just surrender all our money and freedom, everything will be, lollipops and rainbows. But then they rely on these armies of useful idiots that they've trained up in the government schools, that they've brainwashed with the media and the quote-unquote entertainment industry to do, the dirty work, the pressure from below, so to speak. And so they use this pincer strategy, right? The pressure from above, where you have, the big wigs, the David Rockefellers, the Henry Kissingers of the world, the Council on Foreign Relations of the world, pressure from above. And then the pressure from below comes from, the useful idiots on the ground, the rent-a-mobs, the Soros-funded quote-unquote activists. And
don't you find it interesting that the universities are being used as major focal points for trying to proliferate the insanity, and that a lot of the professors are actually joining with the completely crazy people? And I'm wondering how much of this is being created artificially through electronic mind control and things like that, because they're going completely crazy.
Yeah, it's so weird what's happening on the universities. I actually just wrote recently about what was happening at Evergreen State College up in Washington. It's almost like some kind of comedy show until you realize that, whoa, no, these people are serious. And one of the really funny things is that these nutty liberal far left radical professors, now the monster they've created is actually turning on them, and they're going to start eating their own professors. So this is
that's
interesting time to be alive.
Yeah, in California, I think they just identified one of the professors was from, I think he was a retired sociology professor. He was at Berkeley swinging these homemade maces, that you make out of a bicycle lock with a chain, and you can swing it around and kill people, and it looks like you're just innocently carrying a bicycle lock.
Yep, I saw that. And, everybody saw that video now, too, of that professor. Was it a journalism professor in Missouri somewhere? She said, we need muscle. She wanted the journalist to get out of there. Yeah. We need muscle. Bring me some muscle. It
was incredible.
So ridiculous.
I mean, and the fact that they're being hired as professors is just kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah. Well, you have the nut jobs running the departments, and so they bring in a whole bunch more nut jobs, and people who are sensible are essentially an endangered species now within academia.
Yeah, very endangered. The environmentalists should be protecting them. But, when I've had recent experience with a PhD program that I'm involved in health sciences, and I was noticing that mixed in with the health-related information, most of which is false, actually, but it's not the worst part. They've got all kinds of subtle programming of how everybody is so totally different based on their race, their nationality, their ancestry, and everything, and that you can't give the same kind of health care to people of different races because you don't understand what they all believe. And so they were teaching the stereotype beliefs of each race and basically making you think that they're different species. And when I objected to this in a class, I almost got thrown out of the school. And the teacher didn't say anything, but she turned me in as a racist because I was objecting to the racist teaching in the textbooks. And so I was interrogated for a couple of hours to find out, why I was so bad. And in the end, they said, well, we can't find any actual evidence that you're a racist, but because somebody was offended, in this case the teacher, you're guilty, and if you do it again, we'll throw you out.
That's very typical, I think, of the university system today. I remember that from my time in university 10 years ago. I would correct a teacher on an actual factual problem. I had a history professor, and they were mostly interested in pushing Marxism and feminism and unionism on us. And they were talking about the 17th Amendment, and I forget if they said it was about the income tax or I just raised my hand and said, sorry, but that's not what the 17th Amendment is about. They got so mad, they kicked me out of class for correcting them and giving them the correct information. The 17th
Amendment
was about
the... What are you trying to do, think or something? This is about memorization, not thinking.
Right, exactly. So, it's very typical, I think, of, and we've gone full circle now, too, with the racism thing. I wrote not too long ago that Harvard Looney Tunes decided that they wanted to segregate their graduation ceremony. And so they had a graduation ceremony for blacks only. And, we're seeing this more and more now. They want safe spaces where only people of a certain, melanin content in their skin are allowed to participate in the safe space. So, it's just insanity on a mass scale. The lunatics have taken over the asylum.
Yeah, I think they're playing with the general population because it seems really subtly figured out as far as strategy goes. They're going to make everybody end up destroying each other so they don't have to do it.
That's the plan, right? And I've noticed this too. They teach some people, it's the black people, it's the Jews, it's the pick your group, right? So then we'll have a race war, and then they tell the other nut, it's the rich who are doing this to you, and the one percenters. So let's have a class war. So,
anybody who still has any money, right?
Right. So all these different proposals to launch civil wars against, pick your group. And all the while, nobody ever actually pays attention to the puppet master behind the curtain and says, hey, wait a minute here. You're manipulating us. And it's not the rich people, and it's not the Jews, and it's not the blacks or the whites or the, pick your victim group or your oppressor group who's responsible for this.
Yeah, it's a very strange situation that we're in. So Paris was really just an example of something that's happening on a wider scale, which is the scamming of the public in all these different ways that are part of the same program, basically, right?
Exactly right. And, they all have the same ultimate agenda, which is to move us toward this global system of totalitarianism, where basically people will have no rights, where people will submit to, all-powerful global government, at least the surviving people, right? They've already made pretty clear that they want a whole lot less of us people.
Yeah.
And, and all the different scams are really designed to advance this same objective. And, I would argue that there's also a spiritual component to all this, but
Absolutely.
just, purely in the materialistic realm, these people are absolutely mad for having more power and more money and more control, and, nothing will stop them. They're quite literally psychopaths. They don't have empathy, they don't have morals, and they're willing to do anything or kill anyone to have more power and more money, and they're never satisfied. They have all kinds of power and all kinds of money now, but it's not enough. They want more and more, so they come up with new scams like the global warming hoax. And, imagine this. We used to joke when I was a kid, one day they're going to try to tax us for breathing, right? And here they are telling us that the gas we exhale is a dangerous pollution that we need to pay a tax on.
Exactly. Yeah, I think at the very top levels above the corporate leaders that are doing it for more and more and more money and power are the ones that this sounds unbelievable, but they actually believe that if they finish wiping out the entire biosphere and all the people, that they at the top level will merge into cyberspace and become immortal. And they've written about it.
Well, that would sound ridiculous to somebody who has not actually investigated any of these things. But, I think there's mountains of evidence to suggest that there are really people out there who believe this stuff. They just had a World Government Summit in Dubai recently. And you had people like Elon Musk talking about where some of us are going to have to merge with machines and with computers. Yes. And if you don't become a cyborg, you're going to be outdated. Right. And, me personally, I believe the Bible, so I think that's really, there's a huge spiritual component to this. And, Satan hates humanity. Humans are made in the image of God, and so Satan just has a passionate hatred for man. And so it would make total sense that you would want to murder and enslave and destroy humanity. And I think that's at the heart of what we're seeing. I really think this is a diabolical conspiracy that we're dealing with.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's being demonstrated right out in the open. So it seems to me that ultimately we need to take our guidance from government. I totally trust government to guide us. It's just you have to do a little bit of translating and reverse whatever they say, and then usually it's pretty reliable. So, for example, I'm coming a lot from the health field where they tell you that raw milk will destroy the world, so it's a superfood. They tell you that vaccines are going to save you from everything, so they're deadly, and they've never saved anybody from anything. And they have so much help that they're giving us in this way. And so if they tell us that we're completely helpless and stupid and everything we want naturally is evil, and we need a team of experts to help us do anything in our lives, they're actually telling us, if you translate, that we have massive power that we forgot about.
Absolutely.
So if we regain consciousness of ourselves as we actually are, which is not a handful of mud, but we are some incredible creation that has internal normal abilities that have been long forgotten, we may have actually a chance to change things a bit.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, you just hit on so many important points, Richard. I mean, the entire government school system, the entire process, if you will, is really a gigantic exercise in dumbing down, literally. I don't just say that as a figure of speech. They are literally dumbing people down. I mean, a child would be infinitely smarter, infinitely more capable if you just let them run around the house all day than, putting them in one of these brainwash camps called schools, where they're going to be, they're going to have the love of learning beaten out of them. They have their heads filled with all kinds of just totally ridiculous things. And, I say that in absolute seriousness. If you did nothing with your child, the unschooling route, just don't do anything.
Yeah, there is an official system called unschooling. We've had them on the...
There is?
Yeah.
And it's infinitely better than what passes for education today. This idea that you need to segregate the children by age and sit them at a desk so that they can listen to a government functionary tell them all day, every day, about how we came from slime and there's no meaning to life, and here's
we're
how
going to take you back to slime so you'll be right at home.
Exactly right.
And they also, now, in case that's not enough, they'll inject you with things that make your brain not work.
That's right. Or they'll let you change your gender, right? So you can come to school as a boy, and then you can decide you're a girl.
I mean, I've been told there are programs. I haven't seen them personally, but various people have told me there are programs at early elementary school that of special counseling that say, "Are you really sure you want to be the gender that you are?" There are options.
That's absolutely going on right now, all across this country. Things like that are going on. Starting, in kindergarten, in pre-K, they're teaching the children this stuff. At taxpayer expense, in government schools, in public libraries. I just wrote an article the other day. They have this drag queen hour. It's happening in New York and Florida and California, and they have these drag queens going to make presentations for the kids. And you can watch the video on the internet. They tell the kids, who wants to be a drag queen when they grow up? And you have these little 2 or 3 year olds.
That would have a major impact on somebody who's still only 3 feet tall and just figuring out what the world is.
Exactly, and they have no idea. Children are children. That's why God gave the parents to guide them. They don't know.
That was a good idea, right?
And so, they really are just, it's a tragedy. They're damaging the minds and the bodies and the spirits of millions and billions of children all over the world. And now they're trying to standardize this at the global level through UNESCO.
Exactly. And it's not... it's not an issue of hating people that have any point of view. It's that there are biological norms that are part of the whole system that holds life together, and if you get rid of those, life collapses. Right?
Exactly. Yep. And they use all kinds of nice sounding language. They say, we want to affirm people who are diverse, right? Because if you really boil it down, what we're talking about here is child abuse on a massive scale. Just instead of the gender thing, for people who've been brainwashed, think of like an anorexic or a bulimic. A kid comes to you and says, they're skinny as a pinky finger, and they say, I'm so fat. I'm just such a fatso. I really need to lose weight. I'm going to go throw up. And then to affirm them in their diverse beliefs, you would say, you're so fat. I can see it now. You are so fat. You should totally go chop off some body organs so that you don't feel so fat.
And it does not mean that you should hate people that are anorexic or anything else. You really shouldn't hate anybody, because the worst person in the world is still a victim. But the point is losing track of what's actually built into nature as normal.
That's right. Yeah, and it makes no sense. They're telling us that we can change our sex by what we believe, and it's just simply not true. We have chromosomes, we have DNA that determine these things, and no matter what you think about it, no matter what you feel about it, we still need to stay grounded in reality. There is reality. There is objectivity.
Once you get to the point of conception and you start growing from one cell, it's late. It's really too late to change how that's designed.
That's right. And you can chop off body parts, and you can take a bunch of hormones, and it's not going to make a lick difference. Your chromosomes will be exactly the same.
Yeah. No, I've met a lot of people in that situation, and they're not happy with the decision that they've gotten into. I've never run into one that feels good. But
you're exactly right. I have a good friend of mine who's suffering from that. As we speak, it's a terrible tragedy, and I love him. But to affirm that, you're just contributing to the problem.
That's right. I totally believe in individual freedom. The same thing as if you want to take some drug that destroys your body, that's your freedom and not the government. But to encourage people to commit suicide in tricky ways that look attractive is not a really good thing to do.
That's right. If you ask me, that is hateful. To encourage somebody to destroy themselves. That is hating them. To encourage someone to live in a lie, that is hateful to them. So, I agree with you.
And it seems like, what we're being pushed toward is versions of homeschooling, unschooling. Maybe if you're too busy working and you can't homeschool yourself for some other reason, then you could get together with a small group of neighbors or friends that see it similarly to how you do, and put together the program yourselves and don't involve the government if you can. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, there's so much of that that I've learned about over the years. I've I've worked extensively in education and the homeschooling field, especially just in this little community where I'm staying right now. There's all kinds of homeschool co-ops. You have some where the different parents volunteer. One parent who's good at science will teach science. One parent who's good at music will teach music, and they just rotate. Wow. That is so exciting, and the problem with that is when the state says they just won't let you do it.
Yep, and we're eventually going to move to that point. I've spent most of the last 10 years living in Sweden, and in Sweden they finally did come out in 2011 and ban homeschooling. There was only
I didn't know that
200 homes. Yeah, no, I tried to make a big fuss about it. I wrote articles about it in 5 or 10 different magazines and publications. Millions and millions of people read these articles. One of my articles was read on Fox News. It went out in the HSLDA newsletter to 600,000 families, and the Swedish government just did not care. They were not interested in what the world thinks. They said we're banning homeschooling. And the logic, I interviewed the people over at the Department of Education there. They said, well, everyone has a right to education. I said, well, fine. Let the parents provide that right to education. They said, oh, no, we mean a right to a proper government education. And so when they shut the door on homeschooling, they also closed the trap on the school choice thing, because some years before they said, oh, yeah, we'll start funding private schools, and then people will have school choice. Right, and then in the same legislation that banned home education, they closed the trap door, and they said every school in this entire country, they all take tax dollars now, right? So every school must teach from the same government curriculum. And this government curriculum, for example, teaches first graders that they need to understand that gender is a social construct, right?
Yeah.
So there's no escape now in Sweden except leaving the country.
Wow. Is that why you left Sweden, part of it, or not?
It's one of the big reasons. That was a line in the sand. They don't own the children, but they think they do. And, Germany is the same way. Ever since the Hitler regime, homeschooling has been banned, and they ruthlessly persecute homeschool families. Yep. They put the parents in jail. They take the kids into state custody. It's just a tragedy of monumental proportions. Some of them have tried to come here as refugees to the United States, and the court said, oh, yeah, you guys are genuine refugees. No government has the right to steal your children because you want to educate them the way you want to educate them. And then the Obama regime went to war with this little family. Everybody from the whole world can come here, but not the homeschoolers. No way.
I think I remember that, yeah, because it's undermining the authority of the state.
Right, and that was the Romaika family, so that was a case that I followed closely, and I suspect we're going to see that in the United States at some point as well. I think right now...
Yeah, you said the court's saying that the country doesn't own the kids, but they're already they're stealing and kidnapping people's children if they refuse to vaccinate or give them chemotherapy or stuff like that.
That's right. There's a growing number of states now where the state really is usurping the role of the parents. And, I know California has considered legislation where, if you refuse to have your child vaccinated, you can start being investigated by the social services.
Yeah.
So, we're very much moving in that direction. And I suspect that's going to apply to homeschooling eventually as well. My theory is that right now the establishment is just as happy with us outside of the system because, then we won't be pests with the school boards and, what are you teaching my children in these textbooks? But eventually they're going to come back and they're going to shut that door as well. So
where are you finding all these communities? Where are you finding these great communities of homeschooling parents? Is that in Florida?
Yeah, but they're all over the country. But, I'm talking specifically about in Florida. But, I know of precisely the same types of things all across the country. There's national programs that create these co-ops. One of the ones that exists around here that's also national is the Classical Conversations, where they provide children with a classical education. And it really is a co-op. The parents come together and one parent serves as the tutor, and then a lot of it they do at home, but then a lot of it they come together once a week and work together with the tutor. And it's a marvelous program to provide a classical education. And there's so much of this going on across the country right now.
Wasn't that the original American model of education, at least for kids, as in small communities? The parents, sometimes they chose a schoolmaster, but the parents were all involved in deciding how to do it.
That's exactly right. Yep. And for the most part, education was really, the responsibility of parents and the church. And then occasionally the parents would hire a tutor, or a group of parents would get together and, build a little school and hire a teacher. But, education was very much, a family-oriented event, process. So.
Right, with apprenticeship starting later on so you could learn something to do for making a living.
Yep. And if you go back and look at the education that people were receiving, 200 years ago, what you'll find is that it was so superior to what we're dealing with today. I'm not even sure you can apply the same term to both things. What we're dealing with today is not education.
Yeah,
we call it education, but that's really a misnomer.
I've read some things written by kids at fairly low levels of education, and they're just really sharp.
It's incredible. They don't have even the most basic logic skills and reasoning skills, and they don't even know any facts. They don't even have a reference point from which to begin. It's really depressing. When you see this kind of stuff, you see kids graduating from high school and they literally cannot read their high school diploma. I just wrote an article a few days ago in California. The official government numbers show that more than half of the kids cannot read at all. I mean, they don't even meet the basic standard, more than 50% of the kids. So,
Wow.
We're in a whole bunch of trouble here as a society.
I was going to ask you, when did you first live in Sweden? Because you were talking about the, banning of homeschooling over there. Did you say you were only there for 10 years, or I didn't catch that?
I was there most of the last 10 years. I started going there in 2005 was the first time I went there. My wife is Swedish, is how I ended up connected to Sweden.
Okay.
And then I formally moved there in 2009, and we stayed there for quite a long time. And right now we're splitting our time in various different places with no fixed address for the moment. So
Okay. Because Sweden used to be a lot better of a climate than it is now, right? I mean, it wasn't this repressive years ago.
No, in some senses, Sweden was actually very free for a long time, and it paid huge dividends. Sweden was one of the richest societies in the world, and also one of the freest societies in the world for a very long time. It wasn't until about the 1970s that the government really started blowing up like a balloon and basically taking over everything. So, I mean, the Swedish mindset was pretty collectivist even before that. But as far as the government was concerned, the government interfered very little. I mean, to this day, they don't even have a minimum wage law, for example. But in other ways, the government is extremely totalitarian. Nonconformity is really unacceptable in a way that I think most Americans cannot even fathom.
When did they decide to take away firearms rights from people who lived in Sweden? Do you know?
It's been a long process, just like it has throughout most of the rest of Western Europe. They never had gun rights in the same sense that we have them today in the United States. It's enshrined in the Constitution or anything like that. And you can still acquire firearms in Sweden much more easily than you could in, say, Britain, for example, because Sweden is a massive country relative to the number of people there. There's a lot of hunting that goes on. Yeah. And so if you're willing, I actually investigated this because I was thinking about trying to get a hunting rifle when I moved over there. If you're willing to jump through an insane amount of hoops and submit to, all kinds of probes and investigations and inspections and so on, you can still acquire a firearm. But it's been a very long process to get to this point where it's that difficult.
The reason I wondered about that is because the government is definitely in collusion with some kind of a globalist agenda over there now, because they're inviting terrorists into the country to rape and kill people and do all this terrible stuff, and Sweden has become a major rape capital of the world. And I was thinking, well, all you do is just, give all the women handgun training and make sure they all have weapons, and it would be over.
Yeah, well, that would never happen. Handguns are close to impossible to get. I mean, if you do jump through all the hoops and acquire one, you have to be a member of a gun club, and generally speaking, you actually have to leave your firearm at the club. So, you can't walk around with a handgun. It's self-defense is, for all intents and purposes, illegal in Sweden. And if you were to stab a rapist, you would go to jail for that.
Wow, and that's true in England and a lot of Europe, too, now, I think.
Yep.
Do you have a feeling for
Sweden is very much a laboratory for the globalist agenda. They try stuff out there 20, 15 years before they pull it off in the UK and the United States. And so, the homosexual agenda is actually a perfect example of this. In 2000 and was it 4 or 5, they legalized homosexual marriage and all this stuff. They figured out what was going to be the opposition to it and how would we deal with it. And then, of course, 10 years later, it came to the United States. And so that's been true across a whole range of issues. And that's another reason why I suspect the attack on homeschoolers is not going to be too far behind here in the United States.
Yeah, so you can see these programs in education and in vaccination and agriculture and all these ways that these so-called Western countries are all kind of operating a little bit staggered in time, but very much in step with all of each other, like they're all obeying some higher agenda. How do you understand that being coordinated?
Well, you're absolutely right. There's no question about it. Anybody can look at the observable evidence and see that that's exactly what's happening. And I think it happens through a number of different fora. I think, the Bilderberg is one example among many. They just met in Chantilly, Virginia very, very recently. And, there was a number of Swedes there. The leader of the Centre Party was there. One of the big industrialists was there. And there's a number of Swedes who are regular attendees at the Bilderberg summits. And at the Bilderberg Summit, they have an opportunity to coordinate with, really the high-level globalists. The very pinnacle of the pyramid, so to speak, doesn't usually show up, right? I mean, you don't normally have the Rothschilds themselves showing up. They usually send a minion. But, at these types of meetings, it gives them the opportunity to coordinate policy. And, they say, okay, well, what worked in your country? Well, this, and so you get a lot of that. And Bilderberg is just one meeting place among many, right? There's a lot of different forums, and some of them are, much more well-known and sort of in the open. Things like the G7, for example, right? The G8, the G20, all these different things, where you have all these high-level globalists coming together and formulating policy together. You have some institutions like the Bank for International Settlements, where the central bankers come together and come up with monetary policy for the world. So you have all these different forums and meetings, some secret, some not so much, where they come up with this stuff.
So they're all moving towards a common goal, and they understand, even if they are not all conscious of the very top level, which intends to destroy all the normal life on the planet, which I think is getting obvious at this point, then it seems to me that as long as we have, at the moment, means of communication between people in the internet and, applications of that still operating, that somehow each individual person needs to put a high priority on regaining their own consciousness.
Absolutely. And, I always tell people when people ask me, okay, so assuming everything you're saying is true, what do we do? I always say, the very first step is education. You need to unbrainwash yourself. And one of the things I've been looking into recently is, cult deprogramming, because the cults, have been very effective in brainwashing people in a way that makes it very hard for people to leave the cult. And that's very similar to what we're dealing with here. I mean, these people have been brainwashed to an extent that's just really extreme. And then they've been trained to react basically by shutting down their brain and just hollering at somebody or saying bad words to somebody as if that was an argument. And so, the first step is to deprogram yourself. Go back through everything you thought you knew, everything you were taught, and find out, is it really true? And
that
for me,
takes
that was
a lot of
long
courage.
process. It does. And, and even years after I began that process, I still find myself occasionally coming across things that, I had just assumed they were true. It was just obviously true. And, you do a little bit more research and you find out, oh my goodness, that was a lie too, right? And, and it's true across so many spheres of life. We've talked about monetary policy and global warming, but I mean, the whole spectrum of, what you think you need to go back and re-examine all of it. Get books and find credible people and see what others have to say and see if that squares up against reality. And so I think that's always the first step that I say, you need to educate yourself. And then the next step after that is helping to educate others and get other people on their own journey of educating themselves.
Well, and that's what enables you to do it, because if you don't do it to yourself first, you're just talking.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
So, I think people have a fear of looking critically at what they think they know, because they're afraid if too much of the programs turn out to be false, it's just going to be meaningless chaos and they won't have any identity or meaning in life. And it's like we used to have a connection way back sometime to our source, that we just intrinsically knew the reality is not something bad. It's really, really good. And our value is something permanent. And we don't have to worry about that. It's not even in the realm of the mind. But if you don't remember that, and all you have is what you've memorized, then fear has a really good chance to take over, which is what's happening.
Yep. And, it can even be scary when you start realizing a lot of this stuff. I remember when I first started realizing how much of everything I thought I knew was lie. It could be a scary thing. You find out, oh my goodness, there's these wicked, evil people who want to take over the world and kill a lot of us and enslave all of us. And, that's a scary thing.
Yeah,
but,
we thought they were all like Matt Dillon and Chuck Norris, in the TV series, and take care of it.
Yeah, and it's so different than what we're taught to think of the world as, right? We're taught to think, and we just kind of intrinsically sometimes just think, well, we would never want to enslave and kill people, so why would anyone want to do that? But if you look back through history, it's very clear that those kinds of people exist, and they tend to rise to the top, right? They're ruthless. They're psychopaths.
Yeah.
They dedicate all their waking time to figuring out how to murder and enslave and destroy and brutalize. And, we know for a fact those people exist. Just look at the last century. We had Stalin, we had Hitler, we had Mao, we had Castro. How many of these guys until we finally wake up and say, oh, yeah, there really are bad people.
Well, we like to think of that as only having to do with the past, because now we have a society where all the leaders are really good.
Yeah, and it's easy to think that way, and especially in America, right? That could never happen here. That might happen in other countries, but not in America. Yeah, but unfortunately, Americans are, very much like people from any other part of the world. They have the same, fears and the same human nature. We're all people, and we all are, similar in some ways. So America is not immune to what the rest of the world and what the rest of humanity has dealt with throughout, human history.
Yeah, I think part of the reason for that is the really nasty rulers like you're describing are not necessarily tied to any particular country.
That's right. They're very much a transnational elite today. They don't think of themselves as Americans or Canadians or Mexicans or Swedes or French or anything like that.
Yeah, I suspect that most of them we've never even heard their names.
You're probably right. Yep.
So, it can look overwhelming, but I think, my gut feeling about it is that the not so visible powers on the light side of things are virtually infinitely stronger than all the impressive negative ones. And if we can reconnect to that inside ourselves on a level that's deeper than programming, then I think that we can open up something that is what they're really afraid of, which is that we could remember who we are, and that they have no way to, compete with that, because there's some kind of a law of nature that as long as your intent is destruction, you're not going to reach the higher levels of your potential.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. And I think if you put it into a biblical perspective as well, there's some very similar arguments to be made. And, God exists, and He's good, and He is sovereign, and He is in charge of everything. And, the Bible also makes clear that the devil is here, and he has a lot of power. And the Bible actually calls him the prince of this world on a number of occasions. But he's still limited in what he can do. And, once somebody goes to God's side, so to speak, the devil is completely powerless without God's permission. And so that's,
I think that's why they want us to think that we're hopeless and weak and stupid and we can't do anything. But
we came from monkeys, and our life is no more valuable than the life of our goldfish. And there is nothing after this. It's just, we just came from a rock, and we're going to go right back to a rock.
Yeah, exactly. Ground up rocks or something, and nothing else. No real life that lasts beyond a few minutes, which is a lifetime. Yep. But I think that what they're in a race against right now, and the reason that the darkness seems to be accelerating so much, is that they're afraid that there's a chance that people might be waking up a little bit. And that's what they want.
I'm confident that that's exactly right, Richard. I mean, these people, I think they realize they're in a race against time. And, it's been said for quite some time that as we get closer to the end game here, these people are going to have to, do the equivalent of stripping off their clothes and running through the street naked shouting. And, I think we're almost at that time. And then everybody is going to look and say, oh, my goodness, look, they were right. Right?
Exactly.
So they really are in a race against time. They have to set up the control mechanisms and the propaganda systems and the enslavement systems before there's a critical mass of people awake, willing, and able to put a stop to it.
And that critical mass might not be numerically very much compared to the whole mass.
No, absolutely. People think that, unless we wake up the majority of people, it's all over. And, nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah, I don't think we have to.
You just need a small number of dedicated people. And, history has proven this time and time again. Look at the Bolshevik Revolution. I mean, talk about numbers. This was a tiny band of fringe fanatics with basically no public support, and they managed to take over the entire Soviet Union. If this tiny little group of Bolsheviks could take over literally the largest landmass on the planet, we certainly don't need 51% of the American people to wake up to put a stop to these plans.
No, I totally agree, and I think this time it's a lesson in how to do it not through killing and violence, but there's something deeper that we're going to have to get in touch with that's much more powerful. And the test is whether we're going to be able to comprehend and use that. And I think, before we're done, I definitely want to directly address the millions of people who are convinced now that because we're pulling out of the Paris Agreement, which was the original topic, that now we have proof that not only is Donald Trump a monster and with Alzheimer's and a Russian agent and whatever else he could possibly be, but he also hates the earth and he wants to destroy it. So what's the best way to get through to those people who sincerely are thinking that must be the case?
Well, I think first and foremost, they need to understand that the global warming hoax is a hoax. The idea that CO2 is going to warm up the planet and kill us all is absolutely preposterous. It's discredited by all the evidence. And I could talk about the proof of this for hours and hours and hours. I've interviewed so many of the scientists, probably a dozen who've worked on the IPCC itself, the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Yeah. The lead reviewer for the sea level section. He resigned in disgust, Nils Axel-Morner. He was the former chairman of the geophysics department at Stockholm University. He said, hey, I've been measuring the sea level all my life. Don't worry about it. Nothing's going on with the sea levels.
Well, it is interesting that the people who say that it's going to be a catastrophe have major mansions right on the beach.
Right, like Al Gore, exactly. He has waterfront property, and it makes you wonder, does he think he's going to buy enough carbon credits to stave off the apocalypse he's forecasting? Of course not.
Maybe he's just trying to be selfless by letting his house be flooded or something, right?
Right. And we could talk about any number of lines of evidence. We could talk about the experts. We could talk about all the discredited predictions. But I think there's one piece of evidence that firmly puts to rest the theory. The UN came up with 73 computer models. Every single one forecasted warming over the last 20 years. Over the last 20 years, we've had no warming, and this is shown by the satellite record. This is shown by the weather balloon data. So, nowadays they come up with excuses. Oh, the ocean ate my global warming, right? It's all hiding in the bottom of the ocean somewhere. Yeah, we don't know where it is. Yeah, we can't test that. Yeah, we have no evidence of that. But it must be, right? Because we know our global warming theory is right. So the ocean must have eaten our global warming. And, that's a ridiculous excuse. That's not what's going on. And their models were wrong. They don't like to admit that, but every single one of their models was wrong. And, if this was just an accidental mistake, if these were, well-intentioned, well-meaning people, you would assume that there should be something like, half of the models predicted too much warming, half of the models predicted less warming than we actually had. And yet every single model predicted much more warming than we've actually had, which is, of course, zero warming. So this leads me to believe that we're dealing with deliberate, systematic fraud here. I mean, you could have put a monkey in a cage and given him a set of dice and said, roll this dice, and he would have a much better track record of predicting climate and temperatures than all these UN bureaucrats and their computer models. Yeah. So,
well, I mean, they might have to go to the next step. If climate change doesn't happen fast enough to scare everybody, they could get into a catastrophe based on climate stagnation. I don't think they've thought of that yet, but it could be the next step.
That would be interesting, yeah.
But no, I mean, climate change.
Right. But, I mean, that's what people need to understand, first of all. The global warming theory is a hoax, and I encourage people to go through some of my articles. And, if you're not scientifically minded, I've written 2 articles now looking at all the predictions of these people. Every falsifiable prediction that they've made has been disproven. So I encourage people to go look at this. You don't have to be a scientist to see, that these guys have been wrong about literally everything they've ever forecasted that we could prove wrong. Yeah. And, the next thing to understand is that CO2 is actually incredibly beneficial. That's why a farmer pumps CO2 into his greenhouse, right? Because plants do much better when CO2 levels are 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times higher than they are today in the atmosphere. So that's true. The more CO2 is a good thing. And finally, even if you believe the UN's own numbers, right? Even if you believe the UN's models and computer systems and forecasts and all that, if everything that was pledged under the Paris Agreement happens, it might keep the temperature down by a few tenths of a degree over the next 100 years. And in exchange for that, we will be sacrificing trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars worth of wealth. We will be keeping people in poverty. And these are real people, right? Real people who are going to die from a lack of energy, from a lack of food, from a lack
besides, they're not stopping pollution, they're moving it to China and India, basically.
That's exactly right. By destroying our economy, all that does is move the factories and the jobs over to India and China that did not sign up for, committing national suicide in terms of their economies.
Yeah.
And, American industry is infinitely cleaner than, say, industry in China or industry in India. So if you really are concerned about the environment, the Paris Agreement is one of the worst possible things that we could do for the environment. What it will do is it will make everybody on Earth poor, except the dictators who are going to be getting all this money, and, of course, the UN bureaucrats, and especially the American people. So.
Right. Yeah, okay. No, I think that's really important to understand. And one of the biggest things that people are going to have to grasp to even begin to understand what you just explained is, and this is really shocking, and I know that everybody has to, even if they're sitting down, they might be too scared to really look at it. The media, the major media that's on television, is almost 100% dishonest.
Yep.
And once you grasp that, it just shakes your understanding of everything.
Yep, you're exactly right, and it comes through so clearly in the climate report. Right? They never talk about CO2 and explain that this is the gas that you exhale. This is the gas that soda manufacturers put in your soda. This is the gas that plants rely on to be able to photosynthesize. And then they release the oxygen. They never tell you all that. Instead, the New York Times refers to it as carbon pollution. Right? First of all, it's not carbon. Right? It's carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide and carbon are very, very different things. Carbon dioxide.
It's not ground up charcoal.
Odorless. Right. It's an odorless, it's an invisible gas. I mean, you don't see the CO2 in front of you. They always put the picture of, the smokestack billowing out this black smoke. That is not CO2, obviously. And anybody with a first-grade education should know that. But people read this, they read carbon pollution, and they see the photo of the smokestack spewing out black smoke, and they think, oh, wow, we don't want pollution, so the Paris Agreement must be to stop pollution. And this is all trickery by the media.
Yeah, it's amazing. So, okay, well, we'll just consider that chapter 1 with the ongoing education right now. And I'm just absorbing, a lot of the stuff that you were talking about, and I appreciate it, and I just am left with the feeling that I want to continue when we get a chance. And
yeah, absolutely. I always enjoy our conversations, Richard, so let's plan to talk again sometime soon.
Yeah, sounds great. Okay, hold on and we'll say goodbye in the break here.
Very good.
All right, there goes Alex Newman, a good friend of ours by now. He's been back many times on Lost Arts Radio. I always really enjoy talking to him. He's got such insightful realization of what's going on around the world in different parts. He's been in many locations around it, and I first heard Alex Newman on Alex Jones's show, where he's been several times. Alex Jones recognizes also the value of his insight and commentary. So thank you, Alex. Thank you to both Alexes, actually. Thanks to Alex Jones for sharing your guests with us, which often is the case. And anyway, I feel privileged to be in the front row of the class with people like Alex Newman. It's great. And I appreciate all of you letting us do this and giving us a reason to get all these great people together to fill in the gaps in our knowledge and get other points of view to make us think about things maybe in new ways that we hadn't realized before. Economics is an incredibly important subject, so the fact that Alex Newman is really focused on it is, I find, very helpful. And I always come back to the bottom line that it's not just that everything's terrible, it's that you have to realize the challenges that we're facing in order to make strategic decisions about how to best make your best contribution. All of us, you and me and everybody who cares about this kind of stuff. And I always come back to the same thing, that it's a matter of consciousness. We're not going to stand up and fight the rulers and overcome them by force. I don't think so, anyway. And even if we did, I don't think the outcome would be very good. I think that's what they would like us to do from a very low consciousness point of view, and I think we can do better than that. So this is why we're always encouraging, on the Saturday show in particular, where we get to talk about these things openly and with you guys participating in the discussion, that if you really want to help the world, you have to work on yourself. It comes back to that. As much as we're told that that's unrealistic and unscientific and whatever else to discourage us from waking up, I really think that's where the hidden power source is. So if you want to use it, join us and work on yourself, get your health back, learn about the laws of nature, apply them, get your physical health and your mental clarity operating at top capacity, and then start doing the real work internally. And like we've talked about before, and we've talked about so many times on recent shows about the importance of these invisible, powerful frequencies that are all over the planet, and the power structure obviously agrees that that's important because they're trying to cover the whole earth with 5G and worse after that, so that nobody's able to have clear perception or consciousness. They're trying to shut us down before we can wake up and reverse the destruction that they're involved in. So let's take that as a clue and put more attention into realizing the opportunity and value of everything that happens during the day in your own life, whether it's by yourself or interacting with your husband or wife or kids or friends or family or anybody, or in a school or work that you're involved in, taking care of your home or your yard or helping somebody else. It's meeting somebody in the grocery store. They all have huge hidden meaning. Every one of those encounters in every one of the minutes that you're just by yourself quiet. So let's learn to wake up from the hypnosis and start using our time. For Alex's material, go to thenewamerican.com. That's THENEW American.com, and take a look at his articles and let people know about his work. And for Lost Arts Radio, if you appreciate the educational forum that we're producing here and the free form on Saturday nights, and if you have money, donate to us if you feel like it. It would really help us keep going. There's a donate button on lostartsradio.com, another one on Lost Arts. I'm thinking of Alex's site, and I'm tired, it's late, but Alex's site, you already got that, thenewamerican.com. Ours, lostartsradio.com. But the one I wanted to mention in addition to that is Lost Arts Research Institute.org, and that'll give you a little bit of the glimpse into the vision of the school that we'd like to put together if a safe source of funds to do that kind of project come up. And if they don't, we'll just do what we can electronically over the air like we're doing right now. So thanks a lot. I appreciate all you guys. You're the reason that we're able to do any of this, and the reason that I get to spend my time with you sharing some incredible information and friends that we've got. Have a great night and a good week. Use this information the best you can, and I'll meet you here next time.
Listen to our new shows with guests every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. All new shows and archives are available at blogtalkradio.com/Lost Arts Radio. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Lost Arts Radio. We're on Twitter at Lost Arts Radio. Our YouTube channel is youtube.com/C/Lost Arts Radio. Again, youtube.com/C/Lost Arts Radio. And scene.life, we're at Lost Arts Radio/profile. When you do your Amazon shopping, please use Amazon's Smile program at smile.amazon.com. And when you choose Lost Arts Research Institute in Sedona, Arizona as your charity, Amazon will donate 0.5% of whatever your order total is to Lost Arts Research Institute to help fund the building of the school and keep our radio show on the air. Please visit lostartsresearchinstitute.org for more information on the school we want to build. Be sure to sign up for our free weekly newsletter on our site under the Radio Show tab or right from the button on our Facebook page. You're also invited to join our free user forum on our website at lostartsradio.com. You can ask Richard a question there or post about any subject that you're interested in. Our forum is growing and we'd love to have you be part of that community. We keep it troll-free, so don't worry about others, paid or otherwise, speaking negatively or engaging in some sort of debunking tactic fakery. I closely monitor the forum for abuse, and we have a very strict one strike and you're out policy, which is why we require you to register your email address along with whatever screen name or username you want to use. We also have links to all of the great independent musicians whose music we feature each week on Lost Arts Radio. And if you like Lost Arts Radio, please consider donating a few bucks to help keep us on the air. We spend many, many hours each week to bring you the best show we can with the best guests around. You can find our donate button on our website at lostartsradio.com. Contact Richard at richard@lostartsradio.com or myself, Doug Diamond, at doug@lostartsradio.com. You can also find me on Facebook, scene.life, and gab.ai at Diamondisc, DIAMONDISC. My short new video blog or vlog is The Diamond Report, and that can also be found at www.thediamond.report. Thanks again for listening to Lost Arts Radio, and we'll see you again next week.
Living in America used to be a dream for so many people far away and unseen, with their big cars, movie stars, living in America. Now all hail to the red, white, and blue. Living in America was a dream. In this land they tell you to reach for anything you want. Everything is possible, just believe that you can. 'Cause we're God's chosen children, living in America with that long house and white picket fences. Living in America was a dream. Now they believe that their Savior has come to deliver all their people back to the kingdom. Better not try to stop us or get in our way, 'cause we have what it takes to change the world again. Brother, our queen and country follows us everywhere. 'Cause they've lost their voice, they've lost their way, and feel safe in our shadow. Now it's all gone, the glory days, living in America in that high rise with those jumbo